Jeff, are we good? Good. Okay. Good morning, everybody. It is Thursday, February 8th, 2024. This is a special meeting of the Darien Board of Education's Curriculum Committee. Our next meeting will be March 7th. Today, we are talking about, as always, we'll start with a literacy update, and then we'll move into play-based learning as a new, oh, sorry. Here we go. Okay, sorry. It's February 8th at the Curriculum Committee. We are talking about literacy and then play-based learning, which is very near and dear to my heart, so I'm excited about it. Would you please, Amy, start us off with a literacy update?
Absolutely. Thank you. Mrs. Droller and I are looking forward to sharing the Curriculum Committee this morning an update with regard to district literacy team, steering committee, and a smaller core review team that we've engaged to do a really authentic and thorough review of our literacy curriculum in Darien Public Schools. So I'll turn it over to Mrs. Droller to present together.
Good morning, everybody.
Yes.
Having the book working you. Okay.
The wrong one open, I'm sorry.
Is this?
There we go.
Perfect. So we have established a pre-K to 12 literacy committee. We have a steering committee, which is a large group. We have about 40 plus individuals representing all departments, all grade bands, special education, SRBI. We have speech and language pathologists, classroom teachers, administrators, and then we have a smaller core review team. So our purpose is to clarify, we had our first meeting on Monday. We wanted to clarify roles and responsibilities, and our goal is to co-create a vision for what pre-K to 3 literacy will look like in the Darien Public Schools. What do we believe in? What are our non-negotiables in terms of instructional practices and outcomes for students? And then we wanted to brainstorm questions that we could ask focus groups because we do want wide representation in this work. So the committee is co-chaired by Dr. Fedigan, Mrs. Klein, Natasha Torrey, the principal of Royal, Jen Fisher, who represents our Teachers Association, and me. And then we have a list of steering committee participants. We have a link in there if you want to see who is on our steering committee, and then our core review team. Our steering committee meets outside of the school day. Our core review team is going to have some release time, probably about 3 days we anticipate to really dig in. And of course, we want to make sure that everything is grounded in our core values and our mission and our vision so that when we think about what we value in literacy instruction, we want to make sure that it aligns with our district values.
You might be wondering why we're choosing to have, as Mrs. Droller mentioned, a pre-K through 12, grade 12 team. And while the legislation is calling for us to look at literacy curriculum in K through 3, we all know that children are developing pre-literacy skills in the earliest days of school as they join us in ELP and even before so at home as young toddlers. So it's important to include that group. And we also know we can learn from our colleagues in 6-8 and 9-12 around the outcomes of our growing readers and writers as they move up through the system. And we are also ensuring that we're doing this work in partnership with our colleagues in SESS to ensure that we're really being responsive to the needs of all staff and students throughout the system as we take a look at the curriculum review.
So, as I said, Monday was our first meeting of the steering committee, and just having this conversation to reflect, to collaborate, and think about what high quality curriculum and instruction in literacy looks like. We did not get this far, but we do want to develop a survey, and we've already reached out to teachers, and I should have started with that actually. We did solicit participation from all teachers. So we had an open, who is interested in this work, and we let them know that we would also be holding focus groups and developing a survey so that we really can get everybody's voice in this work. We think that that's very, very important. So once we do that and we have a vision, we are going to finalize and review a draft. We want to make sure that everybody is really agrees upon that. And we'll use that to create a tool with which we can review not only the programs on the state approved list, but also our own program, because as Amy has said, we don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. We are all about continuous improvement. Our core review team will engage in some training for consistency and using that lens and a protocol for reviewing material. There are a lot of programs on the state review list. We probably cannot get in depth to review them all. So we're going to narrow that down. And then we're going to determine the strengths and weaknesses of each set of materials. That core review team will bring it back to the steering committee and they will make recommendations. This is our timeline. It is a very aggressive timeline because we do want to be able to pilot something next year. So we need to determine what that will be by June. That is our goal so that we can bring it back to this Board of Ed Curriculum Committee and we can start planning over the summer for what a pilot will look like. Some other considerations, just ongoing communication with teachers, with administrators, with the Board of Ed Curriculum Committee, continued conversations with the State Department of Education. We also want to do a deeper analysis of our subgroup data and so that we really know where are gaps in our curriculum and instruction, ongoing curriculum work, and of course, professional learning. So one of the things that we would love to do is engage all of you in thinking about what are those pre-K to 3 literacy instructional practices that are most important. This is where the question that we started with our committee. And we would love to hear some of your thoughts about that as well. Not to put anybody on the spot, but just thinking about that.
Do you want us to answer now?
Yeah.
Okay. What I think is really important, both as a parent and with my educator lens on, is that love of reading being developed. And I feel like sometimes the reading instruction can get very rote and very, just routine.
Mm-hmm.
And to still be able to have that free time to be able to sit with a book and love that book and be able to flip the pages and in the younger grades look at the illustrations. And I feel like that learning to love a book and having a book in hand or text in hand is really important. That doesn't get lost as we move towards more, screen-based practices. So that's my own personal opinion.
I don't know if anybody else wants to share.
I just had a couple of questions just on the makeup of the steering, not the steering committee, the larger committee. I looked at the link and I just noticed that some schools have much less representation of like a teacher versus other schools. Was there, for the makeup of the committee, was it dependent on which schools had more literacy needs in K through 3 or how was that determined?
And it might be that those schools have more representation on the core review team. Like I said, those meetings are outside of school hours. So there are some teachers that precludes them from participating just because of childcare and other issues. So that was totally voluntary.
But, okay, so if some schools have like one teacher represented and others, had 3 per grade for K through 2 or, one consideration that I just wanted to make sure that all school teachers have an opportunity to give their feedback and then that learning ends up getting back to those schools when it gets implemented in the same manners that we have consistency between schools.
Absolutely. And some of the teachers said that they wanted to participate through the focus groups or the surveys.
Okay.
And not on the committee.
Right. Thank you.
One of the things that we're really cognizant of is thinking about what will be our mechanisms to communicate throughout this process. not only through administration, but through the teachers who are involved in the committee. And also, we do have the literacy team, our interventionists that are alongside the steering committee and core review team. And there is equal representation of those across all of the schools as well.
Okay.
I have another quick question about the steering committee, not about the instructional practices. We talked before when we were talking about how this would work, that there would be some conversation between the secondary level with the elementary. I didn't see any middle school teachers on this. What's your plan to make sure that they have input as to what they're seeing?
So Mr. Janosko is on the steering committee, as well as Christine Depew, who is from Middlesex.
Okay.
And Mr. Janosko has also enlisted the support and voice of other middle school teachers and high school teachers in the process. And we will have also focused, I should say, concentrated focus groups of staff at those levels. I myself have been to the middle school and have met already with an 8th grade team on this topic. So
Okay.
we're definitely actively looking at this through the lens of learning progression and ELP through grade 12 continuum for
Okay.
literacy.
Awesome.
And if I could just add to that, also Scott McCarthy is on is on it as well as myself.
Just one more question on the data analysis of the subgroup data. Does that allow us to drill down kind of into specific schools, or is it more by subject area that you're able to drill down into the data?
We can drill down as finite as the student level, so yes.
And who would be doing that analysis?
We would, or Amy and Shirley and Jamie.
So, okay, the leadership of that. Okay, thank you.
But also school-based teams who are thinking about, for example, SRBI are drilling down to student-facing data. We're just going to look at different methods to do that.
Right, we look at our data all the time. At every, many teams, as much as every time they have a PLC, they start with looking at their data and in one particular area, which is our goal. But we look at it at the school level, at the building level, at the team level. We look at it during literacy team and math team meetings. So we're always looking at it. We don't always do that granular subgroup, like deep analysis and go back and like really mine that data to the level that we want to spend some time doing.
Okay. I just have one more question. So is the intent, I know you mentioned that it's not only evaluating the new state mandated programs, but also looking at our own. Are we thinking, and I know this is very early stage at this point, are we thinking of potentially just adding on to in the areas where the state told us that we need to do something, kind of adding on to our existing program? Or are we also taking this opportunity to evaluate our existing program as well and kind of where we can improve that too? And is that the intent of this entire team focus?
Yeah, I mean,
All of
that's
it.
certainly part of it, yes.
So it was, the charge is here is to look objectively at all the
Okay.
programs, including our own, objectively. If we end up, the resolution to the state is you got to choose one of these things. That's their resolution, right? But if our resolution is we choose one of those, I'll call them curriculums, right? Programs. Then that's the choice that and recommendation that the staff has made based on the science of reading and based on their professional input to it. But they're simultaneously going to look at what we currently have right now. And if their choice is to modify that, complement that, supplement that, then that will also come back then as a recommendation for whatever reason. So, but they understand that the charge of the group is to look objectively. We have been in this process of trying to seek to understand from the state and look objectively. We're not just being dogmatic in a sense of like, we have nothing to learn. We're not going to change the program. We haven't taken that position. In fact, we've taken the opposite position. We will look at all of these really objectively, and let's see what our professional staff who have the expertise in the area bring forth.
Thank you.
Katie has her hand up.
Sarah, thank you. I'm sorry, this is very difficult. A couple of things. One, I just wanted to comment back on a love of reading, and as we develop our programs, I think it's really important to remember that what helps children to love reading is being able to read. So I want to make sure that we are focused on teaching children phonics to decode words and learn how to read words that they don't know. Focusing too much on the component.
Katie, you're breaking up.
To the
Oh, wait, now it's better.
committee, I'm sorry, this is very difficult. The second thing I wanted to ask about was the steering committee composition. I noticed there is only one special education teacher listed as that, and I wanted to ask if there could be more explanation.
I know that Shirley is on it and Scott is on it, and I do believe that we have an SLP. I know that there is one special education teacher. There are more special education teachers on the core review team, and they're going to work hand in hand. Again, that was just the time commitment and availability.
If I could just add to that also, Julie, and you're frozen, Katie, just so you know, but I hope you can hear my response. That in addition to what Julie was saying, we do have represented teachers also and related service providers really are really mindful about missing sessions and time away. It's going to be a 3-day commitment to miss time. So one of the opportunities we discussed, and Kristen is oversighting that as well as Scott, is that to be able to turnkey it from the representatives who are there in the PLCs with the grade level meetings. So the notion is we were mindful not to have missed sessions for students and opportunities, but to have a way to turnkey that information. So we have one of our teachers is on from Tokenique. We have a speech therapist as well. And I think, as Julie said, in some of the other groups, there's more representation that doesn't involve that much time away from students.
Actually, now that I think about it too, we have a special education
I
teacher from
appreciate that.
Henley
However,
and Tokenique.
So this is that I saw only lists one from two. And I would argue that all of the teachers are missing sessions. So that's across the board. And it needs to be considered for everyone. Secondly, I would question the training of the teachers. Are there any OG trained teachers in there? Sometimes the special education teachers are the ones that have done more work in Wilson and OG, and I would think that would be very beneficial to developing a curriculum that looks at specific science of learning.
Do you know if there are any OG trained teachers on here?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Mhm.
All right.
I have just a few
Oh,
other,
go ahead.
couple other questions. One, just to clarify, so it sounds like this is a little bit more about like the methodology for delivering the curriculum versus what's actually in the curriculum. Is that, Dr. Riley? I was just listening to what you were saying. Is that right?
No, the question that was posed was what, I think the question, that if I go back to the question was posed is what are the instructional practice you value
Yeah.
or your things. But no, it is for we're talking about the actual curriculum, but hand in hand, curriculum and instructional practices go together, but we are looking at curriculum.
Okay. So then with respect to looking at the timeline, like, you know, there's no one from this committee or from the board involved in the actual steering committee or any of that, which I don't think necessarily needs to happen, but I do think it would be helpful to have a bit more of an iterative process as you're going through this, where there is more feedback loop, at least maybe with this subcommittee. And when you're thinking about what's the vision, you're going to come up with what that vision is. It'd be great to hear that earlier on in the process versus waiting until the end where you've got a full plan laid out based on that vision that maybe the board has feedback on and then you want to incorporate.
Yeah,
So-
I think it's, I'm sorry.
Oh,
I think it's
sorry.
our intent that
Yeah.
this literacy update is at the top of every agenda every month, so
okay.
that we'll bring it back.
So
whenever
March
it is.
7th, you can
Yep.
expect another update and more dialogue.
Great.
Okay.
And I think we didn't, that would be part of our next steps. So feedback from the curriculum committee. So that's exactly something that we considered. And then sharing this with our curriculum leadership team, who approves curriculum and materials, and then a presentation most likely to the full board of that, I would anticipate. So,
All right, that's it. Any further questions about this for now? Thank you for getting this organized on a relatively quick timeframe. I know it's tight, but we very much appreciate the speed at which this is going.
It's an opportunity, for sure.
Okay, moving on to our next agenda topic of play-based learning.
Okay. Well, as Sarah indicated, this is near and dear to her heart. It's near and dear to my heart as well. One of the things I just want to lead by saying is the legislation with regard to reading and commentary around programming, which can seem rote, right, and more prescriptive, is not necessarily in contradiction to play-based learning. This is another example of both things can be true. Children can absolutely and will and do develop literacy skills with a play-based approach. So we can make both things happen. That's something that we'll be looking at simultaneously as we enter into the literacy discussion with our youngest learners. So today, I'm happy to be sharing this presentation with Shirley Klein and Laura Strayton, Director of ELP. And some of the things that we want to talk about today are the legislation that's impacting schools across the state and thinking about how we approach curriculum and instruction with our littlest, youngest learners. Really a definition of what play-based learning is by law and research. Examples of what play-based learning could look like and will look like, we hope, in our classrooms, and then the impact to continued work in the areas of curriculum and professional learning. So this Board of Education was made aware of this change in statute during our retreat with Tom Mooney when he spent some time with us. And so what the law is actually calling for is for us to have a play-based approach to teaching and learning in preschool, ELP program, and kindergarten. However, teachers in grades 1 through 5 must be permitted to implement play-based instructional strategies. Our focus in district will be, of course, to start with ELP, with preschool and kindergarten. And as everything we do, just like in the conversation we just had around literacy, it's important to be thinking about all of our work in the sense of a continuum as children progress through the system. It's important to note that the play-based learning has to happen during the course of the school day. So additionally, the legislation stipulates that there has to be play-based learning incorporated into daily practice. It can be met through free play, guided play, and games, and we'll talk about the difference and nuance of those terms, and must be predominantly free from mobile electronic devices. And that's also refreshing, I know, for everyone around the table. So our old friend, Mr. Rogers, how does he define play-based learning? In his neighborhood and ours, right, play is often talked about as if it were a relief from serious learning. But for children, play is serious learning. Play is really the work of childhood. So it's really important to think about, again, how we intentionally design from a teaching and learning perspective, curriculum and instruction. And by the way, how we assess learning. We can assess learning as children engage in play. The law, this comes again from the update from Shipman and Goodwin. The law defines play-based learning. It's a pedagogical approach that emphasizes play in promoting learning and includes developmentally appropriate strategies that are integrated, that's a key word, with existing learning standards. So the difference, and we'll continue to talk about this throughout this meeting and of course in the months and I hope years to come, it's very critical that we're thinking about how the standards for learning are addressed. So in our ELP setting, we use what's called the Connecticut ELDs, and I'll share a slide that references those. Those standards have to connect explicitly and implicitly to what happens in kindergarten through grade 12, because we know learning is a progression. It's really fun to know that all of the pictures in this presentation are pictures of our current Darien Public Schools children, and we have permission, of course, to use all of them. So while the legislation is new, newly passed in the 2023 legislative update and will be implemented for 2024, it's my understanding and observation already that Darien Public Schools has been engaging in some elements of this work. And I know from our work with the ELP staff and also the kindergarten, we have an early learning committee that's been working on kindergarten topics throughout the year. They're very aware of this legislation and supportive and enthusiastic about next steps in our work in this area. So another definition of play from the Academy of Pediatrics is that play allows children to use their creativity while developing their imagination, dexterity, physical, cognitive, and emotional strength. and that play is important to healthy brain development. So all research points to this. And one of the key opportunities in play is that it can be utilized and should be utilized to develop all aspects of a child's development. So all of these parts of a child's development are integral to their learning and growth. Most of the research that I would encourage the board and administration to hold on to in the area of play-based learning would come from the Center on the Developing Child from Harvard. And this is just a quote that I'd like everybody to take a look at because it really speaks to the why of play. The pendulum often swings in education, and there for a time being was the notion that we should, really race and put a huge academic press on children in perhaps a way that was not developmentally appropriate. And there's this false dichotomy of academics are different than play. Really, what the research says and what we know is that those things should be integrated and intertwined. And it's incredibly important now more than ever, I'm sure, in the face of the pandemic, but we just think about the health of our society near and far, right? For children to have opportunities to develop critical thinking skills, to develop their social skills. All of this work points to future success of children in college and career. And most importantly, there's even research that signifies how children's future health is impacted by having these early opportunities. So I'd love for you to take a look at this little piece of data. It's age, so 2 from all the way to 70. The brain's ability to change in response to experiences, and then conversely, the orange represents the amount of effort that such change requires. What do you notice about this?
But as we age, it gets a lot harder to change.
So for everybody in this room, this is bad news, perhaps, right? But there's a lot of research in early learning that's called START. It's really pretty simply named. It's called Start Early. And so this research is, again, another piece out of Harvard that speaks to the critical opportunity for young children. It's why we have things like birth to 3 in the state of Connecticut, but it's incredibly important to think about what happens birth to age 7. And that's why you'll often hear this legislation talks about really pre-K and K with an option for grades 1 through 5. It would be my recommendation for us as we're developing curriculum and thinking about instructional strategies, and Laura and Shirley and I have talked a lot about this, to again think about that continuum, especially grades ELP through grade 3. That's something that's going to be very important for us to keep in mind. Another thing for us to notice here, again from the Center on the Developing Child out of Harvard, this is an actual brain scan of a newborn baby at birth. Oop. Let's see, can you click, Michelle? There should be on this slide, the next. It's animated to include.
Is there a link?
No, it's, if you go back, it's animated. It works on my screen. And I have the same as you. I just want to see, I want everybody to have a chance to see this. Okay. I'm gonna
Maybe
pass
Amy,
it
while
this
she's
way.
finding that, you can describe that, Amy, that in the next slide, it
So
obviously gets more
yeah,
robust.
I don't know why it's not going there. There's something lost in translation because it's a
We can see
very,
it from here.
Oh, there you
very,
go.
very same slide deck. What you can see, and we'll make sure that we attach this online, is that as the child develops birth to age 6 and then age 14, the largest number of synapses are formed between birth and age 6. And then after that, they start to decrease. So again, it's it was supposed to be animated on the touch, but didn't happen on that computer for some reason.
You got to word at birth, like
Yeah.
our age.
Exactly. And if there were one of these next for everybody in this room at our given ages, it would could be terrifying, maybe a little bit for us, right? However, this again points to that start early research. One of the people that I like to work with from the National P3 Literacy, National P3 Center is Dr. Christy Cowers, and this is actually some work that she does with the UConn PK3 program. And thinking about under the umbrella of playful learning, there are different approaches that can be used. So free play all the way up through direct instruction. And if you think about it, the difference in these types of play approaches is really the role of the child and the role of the adult. So free play is really child directed, but also without intentional planning towards standards, right? It's just learning can happen during free play. There isn't just that direct alignment and intentionality to standards. And there really should be a balance of all of those things in the classroom. These are, this is some research out of First School, which exists before 2018. This is just one of the more recent publications. So if you think about both of these pie charts show activities in pre-K and kindergarten settings. And I'd like to also ask what you notice about what these charts are telling us, these pie graphs are telling
There's a
us.
huge jump from whole group from pre-K to K.
Huge.
Huge. And the choice diminishes significantly.
Right. And there's so much for us to think about with regard to not only play, but other really important aspects of early development in children. For example, like the development of executive function and how when we provide choice for children, there's an increase in their opportunity to practice those skills. And similarly, there's a difference in providing whole group instruction and allowing children to have opportunities to work directly with teacher or in small groups and to have that peer-to-peer interaction. So part of this legislation is also thinking about what has maybe more recently been happening in early learning childhood settings and how developmentally we need to think about not only shifts in curriculum, but to your point, Mr. Gramling, also instruction. We need to be thinking about both things at the same time and assessment as well. This is just, again, some more information that I've kind of indicated already about free play versus play-based learning. It is important to note that children can have fun and do have fun with free play and also play-based instruction. The difference is, and learning can happen with both. The difference is play-based learning is really intentionally designed to support existing standards in the areas of literacy, numeracy, social standards, behavioral standards, science standards, social studies standards, et cetera. These are some of those standards that I was referring to before that come from the Connecticut ELDS. And what you'll notice is that there are so many domains represented here. So language and literacy, I won't read them all, but each of these areas is developed through intentional play-based learning, design, and instruction. And I know that our early learning centers are also, they're implementing instruction now using the Connecticut ELDS, and they're also using the Aligned CT DOTS as an assessment framework. Just again, a reminder that play is not frivolous. There's intentionality. Play is the work of children. And it also supports the development of those 21st century learning skills. And I know when we think about, again, vision of the graduate, all research is pointing to the fact that when children exit their school experience from grade 12, they have to be effective problem solvers. They have to be effective communicators. They have to have the social skills to understand their position in a situation and someone else's perspective. These are all critical for future success. So what are some of the critical thinking skills that can come from play? They're here. The ability to collaborate, the ability to be a good citizen, to express one's ideas. Children can learn all of these things and more as they play. So you might use blocks, you might use dramatic play. These are just some examples of resources or materials that could be used when you're developing and designing curriculum. And these things exist in our classrooms now. And so what could play-based learning really look like? So some of the things that Laura and Shirley and I are looking forward to engaging staff in the area of professional learning around would be some of these ideas of setting up provocations for our young people. So With that, you look at the existing standards and you develop questions, you develop lessons that include points of inquiry for children or things for them to investigate and explore. So for example, a provocation might be make two cars with different size wheels. Which one rolls the farthest? Can you make a boat that floats? And obviously engaging children in the discussion around using vocabulary and thinking about related, for example, science concepts that contribute to these ideas. Play plans support the executive function and literacy skills. That's the concept of working with young children as early as 3, our youngest learners, to engage them in thinking about making a plan for what they will do in play. Because that helps children think about sustaining attention. And it is amazing to see how children can develop their play plans from the verbal articulation, drawing pictures, and eventually writing what their plan will be. And then how do they execute the plan and reflect on what happened with that plan. And then another source of professional learning that we'll look forward to providing the staff with is the idea of developing play scenarios. Those are typically, they might be kind of how you look at units of instruction. They're derived from student interest. So students typically, teachers know what their students are particularly interested in, and they develop really a scenario that children can explore, develop really sophisticated vocabulary. Children typically develop their own props and engage in role play. And this is when children are really the primary drivers of researching the world around them, which they live. So just a quick reminder that we do have a curriculum revision writing and revision cycle. The impetus for change here is quite obvious. There's legislation that requires us to think about play-based learning, some of which we're already doing, but again, in the vein of continuous improvement. This is some of the work before us. A reminder again that when we think about curriculum and any shifts in curriculum, we're aligning instructional practices. We're aligning how we assess learning with the approach and also professional learning that's needed for our staff. Part of the statute does require professional learning be offered to our staff who will be implementing play-based learning. And so some of the work ahead, Shirley, Laura, and I are developing a very articulated chart to timeline out the actions for our leadership team and the rest of our staff who will be involved in this. So very loosely, we're engaging in continued research now. It'll be important for us to establish a vision. What do we in Darien Public Schools consider to be play-based learning? And thinking about making sure that we're ready to implement this legislation for the effective date this summer. And then the ongoing curriculum writing and professional learning will need to take place to support the effort. Shirley and Laura, would you add anything?
The only thing I'd add, and Laura could speak more, if she recently had training for the staff on the standards, I believe a couple of Fridays ago, and I think Laura's whole team was involved in training as well. And one other piece I do want to add. I think the state has moved from implicit to explicit. I don't want the community or any members of the board to walk away thinking play does not exist now. I think moving to the explicit is really something we totally support and agree on, and that's what our charge is. Do want to remind that we've had this conversation. We also believe in play. We know that we've had this conversation prior also. If you believe that language begets cognition, and if you believe that children really do learn creatively and linguistically, so don't minimize play without structure. It still has a really important value in development.
So for anyone who's listening, I have just a wee follow-up question to that might be helpful or not for people. And we go over these presentations, and sometimes I have a thought at the table. But just for other than maybe stating the obvious, and I have a sense of this too, obviously, right? But the implication of this, the impetus is there. The implication of it are other than saying we're going to do more of it. How we just sort of how would we look at that as saying, I think the implication of this will just generally that. I mean, it's just sort of other than, okay, we're probably going to end up doing more of this. Maybe that's not the outcome, so to speak. I'm just sort of in your own mind, what will be the impact on our curriculum pre-K and K?
I can start by saying that the impact, excuse me, to the curriculum is maybe more clarity around how the standards are connected and integrated across those domains that were represented on the Connecticut ELD slide. And the other piece is, this board has heard, the administration has heard and discussed, and beyond Darien Public Schools, the behavioral needs of children are changing. Maybe that has to do with outcome of the pandemic. Maybe that has to do with the presence of technology, right? And what children are exposed to. All of these things, right? The world is evolving and changing. And so there's significant research on play-based learning and what it does for children to engage them as ready learners developmentally, and reduce behavioral, challenging behaviors when children are not regulated and ready to learn. So I think that is something that we'll see.
And to build on Dr. Edley's question, I'm curious about the ripple effect of this. Like, to me, this legislation is excellent as legislation. What does this mean for education from 2 to 12 and 2 beyond? If one would assume, Laura, that our ELP program is very play-based currently, because that is developmentally appropriate. I think we could all agree that our kindergarten is maybe a little more academic, and that might need to be shifted. But what does that mean for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Like, how will the curriculum change holistically if this new approach of more play-based learning? It is how kids learn. So what do you see happening in the future for the older kids as well?
Good question.
Everyone wants to weigh in on this, but I think, Sarah, the standards were the same curriculum scope and sequence is there based on the new standards. I think the difference is the strategies and methodologies we use, because it'll be implemented, or can be, in grades 1 through 5. Teachers can choose to do that through the notion of play-based learning. I think one of the slides from Harvard shows how there's a real authentic methodology to play-based learning. So you could learn the same science standards via play as you can by putting up a word wall. That's, I think, what the difference is. The other piece I think that happens when you go from implicit to explicit is you have opportunities for progress monitoring. So we know with children who have learning differences in language, that their play might look very different than a typical child who has a different capacity for language. So it really allows us to progress monitor, kind of facilitate that language in play, and gives us a different opportunity, especially in early learning program, to foster that. Now that's done currently, and they actually collected information from Connecticut Dots. I think it offers training for professionals, for speech therapists, for teachers, in terms of sharing practices of how to facilitate language to beget that kind of play. So I think that's the explicit piece. It helps with kind of assessment and progress monitoring, but it won't change the standards. It'll just give another opportunity of how to implement it. Also, one thing, when you do that, you can tap into all the modalities. So you can tap into whether it's kinesthetic or whether it's auditory, or whether it's visual. It gives you a different opportunity to reach all learners by tapping into the same scope and sequence using different modalities in play.
So I'm wondering, with my budgetary hat on, does this necessarily have any budgetary impact curricular? Like, my guess would be probably professional learning maybe, but beyond that, what do you see impacting the budget?
I think that we would have to start with professional learning and give people a vision of what this can look like, and then think about curriculum and instructional shifts.
And then so now I'm picturing a kindergarten classroom where there's a lot of centers, right? So it's reading time. There's a center where there's a phonics game being played here. There's a vocabulary matching game here or something. That is harder to facilitate as a teacher. A whole class instruction is a lot easier for one adult in the classroom. If you have multiple centers and you have a teacher moving around and manage that classroom management piece, are we confident that our staffing is okay as we develop more play-based learning in kindergarten?
Yes, we are confident that the staffing will be able to support this in kindergarten. And the other piece is, it's interesting when you engage children in, for example, scenarios, and it will be, when we move forward, making that much more visible to the board, what that is. The whole class is involved in that, but their children are highly engaged in what their focus area is, for example, the role they're taking on. So it will require professional learning. It will require support for our staff, but it is being done. And I'm sure we'll be able to engage more deeply in it here.
And I think your point about child behavior when children are engaged is very important. So if children are really loving what they're doing and they are having fun learning, their behavior is going to be much better than those who are, stuck in rows and not wanting to do what they are being asked to do.
There's significant research in even how when you're implementing play-based learning and, for example, scenarios, when that should happen during the school day, because when you start the school day with play, children don't want to miss it.
Right.
And so, in certain communities, they've seen improvement not only in behavior, but school attendance. So it is motivating for children, and it's.
Are there any time limits in this legislation about, free play needs to be X percentage of the school day or not?
For recess, there is, but there isn't
But not
necessarily. It just needs to be daily instruction.
Okay,
And play-based learning is not recess, to be
Right.
really clear, yeah.
absolutely. Shirley?
Just before you leave this slide, to answer your question, Sarah, also about the standards and scope and sequence, as you can see, it looks like a physics lesson to me. So I just know that if you look at the pre-K through 12 plus curriculum, that looks like physics.
One of the most fun things to do, and again, it would be wonderful to engage the board in this, is when you witness children learning at play and then you leave and take a step aside and look at the standards, the number and variety of standards that are clearly addressed is mind-blowing. That's one of my favorite things to do, the debrief after. What did we really see happening?
Across content areas.
Yeah.
I
Robin?
think Greg had his.
Oh, sorry.
Somebody, okay. I love this, by the way, because my kids went through Montessori and also Reggio Emilio in preschool and pre-K, which are basically exactly this. So similar to what Sarah was asking, because my experience is that, first of all, in order to effectively teach this kind of methodology, even though it would seem very easy, in order to actually accomplish the instructional standards and meet the curriculum requirements through play is a very, very different approach to teaching. So I do think that the professional development, hopefully our teachers are already doing some of this in ELP and kindergarten, but professional development is really, really critical. And then the other thing of the Montessori, I know, invests a lot in the manipulatives, the teaching supplies, the play-based learning, specifically for math or for science, even with that picture. So I would think that there would be some budget impact to this as well. And I don't know if that's currently included in the budget, or potentially if we could have PTOs have this be something that they could also give, because they do a lot of fundraising. And I think this could be a really exciting kind of a way that they could give to potentially even kindergarten classes. But, I don't know if we get any grant money from the state for this mandate, because it is expensive to do all of that training and to make sure that we have the effective supplies. And then the final point I would make is that in some ways it seems counterintuitive that the state is now saying that they want play-based learning in K through 5. And then they're also saying that the literacy program requires a specific literacy program curriculum that to me seems like it's very book-based. So I'm having a hard time understanding how, from a literacy learning standpoint, the state is hoping to integrate play-based learning instructional practices in K through, potentially K through 5, and then melding that with the new required resources for literacy that they're saying that we are not doing a good job in, for instance. So I'm having a hard time understanding how we will actually affect that and meet the requirements. I don't know if you have any feedback on that, and I'm not sure what they were thinking about that either.
Thank you for noticing that. And I tried to kind of indicate that in the very beginning of my remarks for this presentation. It does appear a little counterintuitive, the approach that the state and what's been communicated about literacy, and then this move toward play-based learning as far as legislative requirement. What I will say is we've recognized, and even people that we've talked to at the state, that programs and materials don't teach children, teachers do. And one of the important things for us to keep in mind is a program or any type of material or resource we use is not the curriculum. And so the curriculum, as we develop it in districts from a play-based approach, and the instructional strategies we use will be able to effectively accomplish both. Because we will be writing play-based curriculum, paying attention to the literacy standards for children that are pre-literacy standards in ELP up through grade K, K and beyond.
And I think Amy mentioned there is room for both. There is room for some play-based, if you're thinking of reading period, there might be a 15-minute mini lesson at the beginning of very explicitly based instruction. And then there could be, just fidgeting centers around the room where you go play with this game about those, both can be true.
And I was just going to jump in and say, there is a time and a place for a structured, systematic, explicit instruction without question that is necessary. And then there is a time and a place for that play and exploration.
Great, sorry.
So I would echo Robin's sentiments in terms of like, this is great. My kids benefit from the same Reggio Emilia program and curriculum that she mentioned. It's surely interesting that you mentioned physics in this. It reminded me of the Rube Goldberg project that I did for Mr. Dumais my senior year in AP Physics. So it does extend beyond, as Sarah said, beyond fifth grade. And I think there's, I think that's one question is how can we, it doesn't necessarily need to be play, but projects, group work, that kind of stuff. Like it does, and it is really helpful in the business world, I would say, in terms of working with teams, which is essential. On page 24, I thought the pie charts were really interesting. And the reduction choice was interesting, as well as the meal reduction, 17% to 2%. I'm interested as we move forward, just like, will there be a target? Are we thinking about like how much of the day we as a district want to have play-based learning included? And then what constitutes play-based learning? Like, for example, I think someone said recess, like, does that count? Or is it really only stuff within the classroom that's organized by the instructor?
We will get more clarity on that, but recess is not considered play-based learning. It's for a different purpose. It's also legislated and very important, I might add, for children to have that opportunity. And the state's very clear on making sure that, for example, children don't miss recess because of a disciplinary infraction. Kids need to be able to move. I love your example of your senior AP project. And Dr. Adley and I attended the Curiosity and Experiment event hosted by Darien High School National National Honor Society, getting the letters mixed up, but our Honor Society for our tech students. And
JETS, is that the JETS, Junior Engineering Technical Society?
It's the National Technological National Honor
It
Society.
wasn't the Jets, but
Something
something
similar.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. It's like we have National Honor Society. This is for the division of our tech department. And there were children there, our youngest elementary children engaging with our high school students. And I turned and said to Dr. Adley, this is a primary example of play throughout the system. So it's happening. It's just being more explicit about it.
And I'm sure those high school students were very engaged in what they were doing, and there were smiles
We
and
were
there were
too.
laughter. Yeah,
Everybody in the room
Yeah.
was engaged.
there's a lot of hands up.
Yes, I also would say, I think the K through 12 robotics initiative also is very, very much inspired in a way and allowing for kids to have play-based learning and problem-solving exercises, even at the levels of K through 2. So I think this is an exciting opportunity for us.
Shirley?
To that point, yeah, even the physics example also could fit into STEAM as well. So you can look at it both ways. Just to go back to the question about literacy and the initiative, to add to what Sarah said about you still have mini lessons and what Julie said about still have a structured. There are, not to minimize the idea of elaboration of language during play, of comprehension. Those are areas we're looking for in our literacy program: comprehension, elaboration of language, the idea of planning and executing. So I think in terms of literacy also, if you look at language, again, obviously language focused, if you look at language and elaboration, those are pre-writing skills. So during play, you can have that. If you look at comprehension and posing questions, and that's part of our literacy program, what kind of authentic questions can they answer and go beyond the concrete, but go into critical thinking and analytical thinking of the main idea of what their play was, predicting outcomes of whether they're mixing something with measurement or doing something. So those are true aspects of literacy. And actually comprehension was one of the things we cited in our literacy goal of our science of reading. So just wanted to add, there are aspects of that.
Writing as well, children labeling and writing things as part of their play is huge.
Something just popped into my mind about when this gets implemented in the fall. I think this is gonna be very well received by some parents, and I think that some parents might not understand this and feel like this is, taking a step backwards and play doesn't, that. How do you plan to explain, or is the kindergarten open house going to, I would suggest pointing it out to parents and what the benefits and making sure that parents understand that play-based learning doesn't mean free play. Because that, if it can easily be construed, I think.
An important point, I think how we introduce this at the beginning of the year and also how we carry out the messaging as children are learning and growing throughout the year through this type of instruction. To be clear, right, indicating which standards have been addressed and making those explicit to parents as well.
Anything further?
I also, just the brain chart the graph that you put up on the slide, I also think that in my mind really is something that, the fact that we have world languages in kindergarten through 5 and the music and the art programs and the opportunities for kids to experience all of those things at a time of age where their brain is developing the synapses, and that's a once in a lifetime opportunity for them, to me really supports all of the programmatic kinds of things that we're doing in our specials and languages. So I just want to make that plug, and how that's very, very similar to this mandate for play-based learning. And learning happens in all of those areas.
So this will be my favorite discussion of the year, combining play-based learning and world language. And that's why when you think about the critical age period for learning language, it's the age of 12. And it's exactly what that brain scan represents. Such an important point to remember.
Katie, I don't want to overlook you at all. Do you have anything to add to this conversation or questions you need answered?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay. Any further comments? Okay, moving on to public comment.
Good morning, anyone in person? If anyone online would like to participate in public comment, please use your raised hand icon. There are no raised hands.
All right, thank you, everybody. I will see you in March. May I have a motion to adjourn?